Hey, Group Talk listener, Jason here, Group Talk producer. Our Group Talk podcast is growing in listenership, and we have exciting news for you listeners. Starting April 6th, we are launching the Group Talk network of podcasts. Don't worry, we'll still have your favorite shows, favorite hosts, and favorite topics. They'll just be on their own separate channel. And they'll be available wherever you choose to listen to your podcast. And best of all, we will be expanding and offering some very exciting new resources to help equip you in your ministry. Because a great network is made of great people like you. Welcome to Group Talk. 4 shows, 1 podcast from the Small Group Network focusing on topics relevant to small group ministries. Whether you're in a church of 100 or 10,000, whether you're a volunteer or staff, we want to support, encourage, and equip you to lead well. So relax, listen, and enjoy Here to There with Carolyn and Taketa.
Hi everyone, welcome to Here to There, where we explore the movement from here, our current reality, to there, the envisioned future that God has for us. Well, if you've been in conversation with any young people in your church, or perhaps you are a parent of young adults like I am, you may have heard the concerning news in the past couple of years of Millennials and Gen Z leaving the church and walking away from their faith in greater rates than past generations. It seems to be growing number every year of nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and those who have left the faith. And so how the Millennials and Gen Z are deconstructing their faith, how they're becoming more cause-driven, how they're craving authenticity and transparency and leadership, and really wanting safe spaces to figure out who they are and what they believe. It raises a lot of questions about how we serve them in our church. What are the younger generations looking for from churches, from small groups, from their spiritual leaders? What are some unique markers of this generation, and how can we serve them through our groups ministry, our age stage specific groups, as well as multi-generational groups? And how do we create low hurdle entry points for young people to engage? And what would it look like for us to build those relationships and lead in such a way that the younger generations of adults will engage more deeply with Jesus, have more meaningful conversations with one another, and be able to move forward in their faith with their church body? So this month, I recorded at the Small Group Network Lobby Conference, explored these issues with Saddleback's development pastor, Dave Alford, who has worked with younger generations in both ministry and higher education for decades to learn how we can better care for, better minister to, and better engage young adults in our families and our churches, on our staff, and in our communities. I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for being on Here to There. And I'm excited to have this conversation because I know you've been involved with younger generations for quite some time. So maybe start off by telling us a bit about your role here at Saddleback as a pastor of leadership development, and then maybe what you did before, part of your story that kind of intersects with this topic.
That's great. Carolyn, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on. I've been at Saddleback about a dozen years and have worked with small groups the last few years. But to be honest, my real passion at Saddleback is that I've worked with our intern program the entire time I've been at Saddleback. And so I've had a chance to work with younger generations, typically college students or just post-college students in my time at Saddleback. And so that's been great. Before that, I did a stint in Christian higher ed.
Oh, okay.
And so I worked at local Christian university for a dozen years, both in administration and at business school, did some teaching as well. And so I've always, I know we're talking about Millennials and Gen Z here, but I've always been interested, I think, in those formative years around college and after college. And so interested to talk about that today.
Yeah, and you also have a personal interest because you have young adults. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've got 3, and they're all in their 20s, and we have survived so far. But no, they're great kids, and so yeah, it is a topic that's very interesting to me. I think my kids, they sort of bridge the millennial Gen Z divide. They've got, the oldest is probably technically a millennial, and the younger 2 are probably Gen Z.
So what's the year? I know it kind of switches depending on, what report you read, but generally, if you were going to define the breakdown between millennial and Gen Z, where would you put it?
Well, what I've generally seen is about 1981 to 96 are millennials, and 96 to about 2010, maybe a little past that, are Gen Z.
Okay, so in working for now, sounds like a couple decades with young people in those age ranges, what are some stereotypes? I know there's a lot of stereotypes out there, but what are some things that are true about them that may be in the culture as a stereotype?
Yeah.
For each of for the Gen Z and then also for the millennials.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go off script here a little bit, and
we don't really have a script, so that's really fine.
That makes it easier. So I am not one who's given a lot to the stereotypes of these generations. What I see is a lot more commonality, and as I said, I've been interested in sort of the college, post-college age for a long time, mostly because I think it's such a formative time where people are, when it comes to faith, certainly they're making their faith their own. They're figuring out what they want to do in life and those kinds of things. And I see a whole lot more in common with generations at that age than I do differences. Okay. And so the interests are just that. I think that at that age, there's a whole lot more idealism, and millennials kind of have the knock a little bit that they're completely idealistic, almost to the point of not being realistic. And I think that was maybe for an age, a particular age, that might have been true, but I certainly don't think it's true in the long run. But I think that they're idealistic, they're cause oriented, and I think that's great. I love that aspect. But as I said, I think that's not necessarily true just for a generation. Right. I think it's true for that kind of age range.
What would be the negative side of that? Yes, the idealism, the cause-driven, passion, caring about a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. What's potentially the flip side of that may be unique to this generation?
I think the flip side, at least the stereotype, is that they'll walk away from something if it's not meaningful to them,
right?
Or they will walk away if they are not allowed to really have a substantive say in what's going on. And I think that's part of, and particularly for millennials, I think that they at times have had the option to do that, and so I think we're talking about more privileged millennials.
Yes,
we're talking
that's
about
true.
That.
Right.
But I think they have been able to do that, but that really has not been my experience. And in fact, one of my loves is leadership, and I think that these generations, actually, if they are led well, that they actually are put a lot of time and effort and cause and commitment into things. That's been more my experience rather than the kind of the negative stereotype.
Yeah. Okay. So I totally want to explore what does it look like to be led well. So we'll get to that. I just want to delve a little more into, okay, so you think that kind of in culture that we're saying this generation is so different because technology, I think that's typically the thing that gets blamed for the instant culture, that they want everything. They want to be CEO now. Mm-hmm. They don't want to do the grunt work and build up to it like maybe our generation, Gen X or Boomer certainly had to do. And so if you have a millennial or a Gen Z on your staff, and you work with, these interns and whatever, is there an expectation that's different about how they're going to move through a church organization?
I think there probably is. I think there's an expectation that they are going to, as I said, have more substantive say, be involved more in things. But I frankly think that's a good thing. And I think that it becomes incumbent then on leaders actually to take advantage of that.
Right.
And rather than, trying to get them to do what you want them to do, instead, the whole idea of vision, where are you going? What is your cause? What is it you're trying to accomplish? That if you can give that kind of picture, that's the kind of thing that lights people up. A few years ago, I hired onto our staff a guy who would have been a millennial. He was a tech guy. And I sat down with him. First conversation I'd had with him, I was hiring for a technical position too. He was a computer guy, developer. And so I sat down and I started off by saying, here is the vision of what we are trying to accomplish. I described the outcome destination that we wanted to, and I could see his eyes light up. And I knew he was the right guy for the job, and he ended up joining our team, made a huge contribution. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Rather than talking about we did talk about his technical ability for the job. What was much more important to me is, is this a cause that he could align with? And if he could, then he could bring those gifts to the cause. And so I think that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's great. Connect them to what they are passionate about. Let's talk a little bit about the faith journey for millennials and especially for Gen Z. There's been a lot written recently. Again, because it's not a new conversation, right? Deconstructing their faith is not a new conversation. We all did it at some time, probably in our 20s, but it's getting a lot of oxygen these days because of a lot of failures in the church or the perceived politicization of the church. I mean, a lot's happened in the last 2 years with the pandemic that's made younger people, especially disillusioned, the racial issues, just there's so many things, right? And so do you see a lot of the deconstructing process look different than maybe previous generations?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a good answer for it. I think generally what we're seeing, and I think the reason deconstruction is happening is because I think we all have to go through deconstruction at some point. I mean, that's sort of a popular term, but we have to go through a process where we make our faith our own, particularly if you're growing up in church.
Yes.
You grew up in church, your parents' faith is your faith, and you accept it up to a point. But at some point, there comes a moment where you have to make that faith your own. And if you don't, there's not much faith there. I think the observation that I get, and this is both in Christian higher ed and in the church, is that unfortunately, in a lot of church families, a lot of Christian families, that somehow the deconstruction is being delayed. In other words, it's not happening when they're a teenager. It's happening instead later on. And so we're seeing this departure from the faith as a result of that. I've seen that in a lot of cases. I don't have data to back that up. Right.
No, yeah,
that is purely an observation.
Why do you think that is?
I think that's got to be a combination of parenting and perhaps what we're doing in the church as well. My own experience, I don't know what yours was, but my own experience is that with all three of my kids, there was a moment, and I can almost remember it. It was so important. It was one of those things that stood out. A moment where they came to me and had some question about faith.
Right.
And it was a doubting question. Dad, how does this work? How does that work? And in all three cases, I think maybe with some help from the Holy Spirit, I think it was the wise thing to do. The first thing I said to them was, you can always question your faith.
Yes.
Because if your faith is not strong enough to be questioned, it's not a faith worth having. Yeah. And I like to think that opened the door to those kinds of conversations with my kids. And so we went through that, and thankfully, and again, thank God, our kids went through that fairly smoothly. They never walked away from their faith or anything like that. But they have lots of friends who did.
Oh, yes.
So I've had a lot of conversations with them about it. And I think what they have typically said to me is they've talked about how their friends didn't have a chance to do that, or if they had a question about faith, it was kind of pushed down rather than being encouraged to ask that question. So I think that's one. Again, don't have data to back it up. It's purely observation. It's anecdotal. But I think encouraging when those moments arise, encouraging those moments for those kinds of deep conversations. Right. We need to do that, and we need to be ready to do it.
Yeah, that is so wise. I think the nugget for parents, if you're listening and you have teenagers or young adults that are asking these hard questions, I think our impulse as Christian parents is to be alarmed, concerned, disappointed, judge. I mean, there's just a whole range of emotions, right? Yeah. I tend to have a very expressive face, so I have to when I'm facing one of these kinds of conversations with my daughters, I have to mentally tell myself, okay, don't make an expression, don't look disapproving, don't look shocked, just try to keep a poker face, because I want to invite the conversation. I would rather have the conversation, even though it may not be, a comfortable one, or it may not be what I want. I would much prefer to just keep them in their little bubble, in their Christian bubble, and continue along. But that's not the world in which they live, and this is not who they are becoming. Yeah. So I think that the call to, and the wisdom you're offering with invite the conversation, even if it's hard, so that you get the opportunity to walk with them through it.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is their faith is being questioned and
all the time,
every day.
Yeah.
And our kids went to public school, and not all
Mine
kids
too.
do, but public school, and so they always felt like they were the minority.
Oh yes, for sure.
When it came to faith.
Yeah.
And so to not be willing to have the kind of conversation or let them ask the questions they wanted to ask, I think it would have been a big mistake. So.
Yeah, and actually the public school thing is so interesting because when my kids they went all through public school, I think part of our desire as parents was to equip them for the world at large and while they were still home. So because they were mingling with kids who were not of faith, most of their friends were not, on their teams, on their classes, all of their friend circles, that they had to test out a lot of these theories first. Yeah. So by the time they went to college and secular universities, they were able to respond to some of that, and at least at some level, and then kind of deconstruct from the next level. But whereas I think what I've observed with, and obviously this is such a gross generalization, is that if you don't get that testing earlier, and then it's going to come at some point, like you said, you're going to have to make your faith your own at some point. So when will that be? And for some, when they tell their faith stories, it's like after they had kids, then like they had the whole deconstruction thing happen. I'm like, okay, let's try to have it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, no, and I think it's the healthy thing. And as you said, they're going to be challenged. So they need to be prepared for it.
And they may not end up in a place that you agree with. And I think that's the scary part. So how do you navigate that, Dave, if they end up in a place, at least for a season?
Yeah. Well, I don't have advice for that. As I said, we've been very fortunate. Our kids are very strong in their faith, their doctrinal positions, and I think their position, particularly with the Bible, kind of align with ours. But it happened, I'd like to think, not because we told them that's the way it is, but because they went through the questioning themselves and came to the same conclusions that Molly and I did.
Yeah, so when you have the interns as part of your program, do they feel free to ask questions because they're now employed at the church? Yeah. Or is there more of a hesitation because they're looking, these are interns that are interested in ministry jobs? Is that how? Tell us a little bit about the program.
Yeah, we have about 80 or 90 interns a year at Saddleback. Okay. And so it's a pretty robust program. Yeah. It's something we put a lot of time and effort into. Because of the size of our church, we're fortunate to be able to have both ministry kinds of activities. It's all ministry, obviously, but traditional ministry kinds of activities, as well as things that might not be so direct.
The more administrative.
Yeah, exactly. HR or other things like that. And so we like to recruit interns into all of those areas and give people a chance. Our goal is that we're trying to develop leaders for wherever they end up. If they end up in the church, fantastic. If they end up in a business or education or wherever, we want to have Christian leaders in those places. And so that's what we are trying to accomplish. One of the things that we do in terms of an onboarding process, and this is true both for our staff and for our interns, is one of the steps that we have them go through is what we call a theological interview.
Oh, nice.
Which sounds pretty ominous. And it scares everybody half.
Is that with you, Dave, or is that with other people?
We have a number of people
who do it. Okay.
I do them certainly as well. The idea is we do want to talk to them about theology, but it's actually a much broader conversation where we have them connect with one of our pastors on staff, and we talk through the culture of Saddleback. But we also get pretty deep into their own individual story, what they're going through. And actually, one of the last questions that we ask in the interview, and they're usually 45 minutes, an hour long, one of the last questions we ask is there anything that you are struggling with that you'd like to share with us? And many times they will have already shared something, but we can hear all kinds of things at that point. And I'll usually preface it when I ask that question by saying, this is not going to be a disqualifying question. In other words, if you're struggling with some sinful habit, for instance, don't be afraid to share that. And they often will. And we don't disqualify them unless we think it would be better for them to delay it. But the reason we ask that question is both because we want to create an open environment where it's okay to share what you're thinking, what's going on, and at the same time to create the kind of support system around them while they are interning, that we can help them with
that makes sense.
So I would say that is an element of Saddleback culture, which I would attribute to Rick and Kay Warren. They are very good about creating open environments. And so we try to do that with interns to make it okay to talk about what might not be okay in some settings.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know how many churches would ask that question. But that's a really excellent one to ask in a safe environment, right? In our leadership application for small groups ministry, we do ask the last question is there anything about your life or your pattern of living that you want to share? And we've had all kinds of interesting things come up from that. But when you ask that question, give us a sense of what type of things are these young people bringing up?
All kinds of things. And some of it is things you wouldn't be surprised at. It's not unusual for guys to say that they had struggled with pornography.
That's like, 80% or something? Yeah. It's incredibly high.
In fact, I always feel good when they say that because I this is a huge generalization, but sometimes I feel if they don't say that to us, they're not actually telling us the truth.
Because of statistics,
I'd much rather hear that. And then we'll talk about it. Anxiety is a huge one.
We've been hearing that a ton in the last 2 years.
Yeah. And that can come up with both sides, but those are the two that rise.
Big ones.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So shift this a little bit. So what do you think the younger generation is looking for in a church? We've been hearing statistics about how they're leaving in droves. The nuns, people who don't affiliate, have increased. COVID has made everything worse on that front and not choosing church. There's, we've said earlier too, a lot of the missteps the church has made. So what do you think they're looking for in a church?
Yeah. And again, I'm going to state this just for the audience that I'm not speaking from data here. I'm really speaking from observation.
Yes.
But there are a couple of things that seem to always rise to the surface in my conversations with this age group. At the top of the list is authenticity. Is a church authentic? And can you be who you are at the church? Are the leaders of the church being who they really are? And so that seems to be a huge one. I don't think authenticity is necessarily unique to this generation.
Because we like it. We would like to see that in our leaders.
Everybody likes authenticity, but these generations actually articulate it. And so I think that's a big one.
How do they articulate what it would look like, say, in a spiritual leader? What does authenticity to them look like? Does it look like sharing, all of your stuff and your weaknesses, sins, whatever from the platform? Does it look like they actually live out, kind of our old definition was you live out what you're preaching, right?
Yeah.
But how are they assessing it?
I think it is primarily transparency. And I would say it's not appropriate for leaders to be 100% transparent publicly.
Yes, it would not. Right.
But I think that there is a level of transparency that they are looking for. I think what we found is that that's one of the attractive things to Saddleback Church. We have, one of our largest ministries is Celebrate Recovery.
Right.
And so it is it's a recovery ministry, and it is based on transparency and sharing who you are and what you are and what you're going through. And I suppose at Saddleback we have thousands of people who have been through Celebrate Recovery, and so it permeates the culture of our church. And I think it's one of the things that's attractive. At the same time, Rick is quite transparent in his preaching, sharing struggles that he's gone through or that their family is going through in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
And I think that is an attractive thing to young people, to this generation in particular. I think that's what we're talking about with authenticity. Yeah,
and certainly in a small group, for a small group leader, I think they're looking for places where they can be, as you said, be themselves and feel like other people are not faking it. The faking it is like the big sin for the younger. And we don't, not that older generations want fakers either, but I think that it's different, right? I don't know quite how to articulate the difference.
Well, and I think what we all figure out pretty quickly is whether it's safe to be authentic or not.
Yes.
And so it really is the environment of safety. I think, like you said, we'd all love authenticity, but I think unless we feel safe,
we're going to hide.
Actually try it, yeah.
Right. Okay. So you said there were a few things. So authenticity was one that they're looking for. What else?
I think the other big one to me is cause. And what is the cause? In other words, what are you here to do? Justice is big with these generations, obviously. So it's more than just saving the world spiritually, although we know that is the root cause that there is. But it's how is that being lived out? How is that being played out? How is that being applied to other areas of need? And is that articulated well? It's one thing to talk about it.
Right.
But do you have a vision for it? Is there something that you're actually working toward? And are the programs, the activities, whatever of your church, do they really align with that vision or not? And when they do, I think that's what's attractive to this. I think it's attractive to all generations, but particularly attractive to these generations.
Yeah, so just building a local church in and of itself, or the spiritual goal of discipleship, is a little nebulous. I agree with you. I think they want something they can sink their teeth into and feel proud of their church for doing certain things that help the poor or the environment or racial justice or whatever the cause that's on their heart. Is. When it comes to small groups, it's a little harder for us to give them a cause, because the cause is relationship and community. So any tips on how to make that more of a causal thing that would be attractive?
Well, and this is where, in the Saddleback model, small groups, we believe in fellowship and discipleship. Those are the core parts of a small group. We also see mission as being an important part of it.
It's one of the 5 purposes.
It's one of the 5 purposes, exactly. And so we like our groups to engage with mission at a global, a local, and even a personal level. And so even there, now it needs to come, I think, but we have to do a lot of encouraging for that to happen. But even there, that can come through a small group, and I think it's attractive when you do it.
Yeah, and I think inviting them. I had a conversation with a small group leader that has a multi-generational group, which is an interesting one too. So let's talk about that, actually, put that aside for a second. And he was having a struggle trying to figure out how to engage the younger people in the group. And I was like, give them something to do. Like, help them to feel like they belong and they're needed. And he's like, well, I didn't want to put a burden on them. I'm like, no, I think that actually makes them feel participatory, and that makes them, and whatever cause they are interested in, see how your group can kind of come alongside that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually seen this, and we're not alone, but we've actually seen this in terms of an evangelistic effort as well.
Oh, yeah.
We did, during COVID, like a lot of churches, we did a huge feeding program. It was, I suppose we served hundreds of thousands of people during those big months of COVID. And what we found is we actually had people who wanted to come and help with food service who had not yet crossed the line for Jesus.
Oh, that's great.
And as a result of helping people, they came to faith.
Being in that community, yeah.
And so the cause actually is what attracted them to faith. And I think that's not an unusual journey these days.
Yeah, so so there's also the stereotype, and a lot of churches also do this because it makes sense, that young people just want to be with young people. So we do a lot of segmenting of generations, right? So we have a lot of life and stage groups, and there's nothing wrong with those. We have them in both your church and mine. We have marriage groups, we have, all of those, and there's a need for that. But I've started to really appreciate more the intergenerational groups. They are harder, but can you speak to the value, or do you guys see that as something that young people value? Surprisingly, the older people like ourselves, are usually feel insecure about it. They're like, I don't think young people want to be in our group. But then we go to the young people and they're like, I really would love to be around some older Christians who've been with Jesus for a while or have been married. I don't really know how to do the relationship thing. And they seem to want it. And it's an interesting dynamic we're starting to see. And we're having more partnerships between our senior adults ministry and our young adults ministry to try to see what this is about.
Yeah.
And so that's a newer finding for us. Have you noticed a desire for that?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that we've cracked the code on it either. But I would say, I'd use the term mentoring. What we hear a lot from younger people is a desire for mentoring. It might be in the area of marriage or parenting or career.
Yeah,
a lot of different things. And so we have tried, probably like you, we've tried some different things. The place actually where I saw the most success for it was not during my time at Saddleback. Was when I was dean of a business school, and we did a mentoring program. And the way that we did it, rather than trying to pair a mentor with a mentee.
Yeah, that matchmaking we've tried that so many different ways. It's never really worked well.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. But we just got a bunch of mentors in a room and a bunch of students, and we put some pizza on the table and let them talk. And we usually would have a topic. So there would be some topic that they would discuss. One of the mentors would give a presentation for a few minutes. But we found tremendous success there. In fact, so these conversations would happen around the tables. They'd talk with different people. But that then led to relationships outside of those meetings where the students would say, hey, could I meet with you? And so we saw that, and something, I don't know that we've tried that at Saddleback. Maybe we have, but I think that is an approach that might work as well. But I would agree with you that there is this desire on the part of younger people to take advantage of people who have kind of gone the path before and can give them some practical wisdom on how to handle things.
Yeah, or they just want to put their names on LinkedIn. We're not quite sure what is it they're really asking for here.
Yeah, right.
But I think mentoring looks different now too. Before it used to be, let me impart my wisdom to you. But back to authenticity and transparency, now it seems like successful mentoring is more about creating that safe space where they can wrestle with things and you hand out wisdom in little nuggets.
Yeah.
I think they seem to be more reluctant to take anything, whole cloth. Just maybe because I'm Asian American, I tended to respect the elders a little more. It's part of my culture. But I'm not seeing that as a natural default.
Yeah, I would agree. That's why I think it gets wrapped up in relationship. And if there is a relationship there, it's not a programmed kind of mentoring. It's much more relational. And as you do a little bit of life together, then those opportunities, as you said, to drop the nuggets comes along.
Kind of like parenting.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very true.
Except you're not as stressed out by what nugget is going to drop here. I know that Saddleback does a huge job of resourcing other churches on so many things, and I think when you've been part of and you speak often at Saddleback related events. So when you look at other churches and trying to crack this nut about younger people, and there's a lot of hand wringing about the young people, they're walking away and all of that. And I do think your comment earlier about it's not that new. Like we don't have to be scared. It's different. Social media, online, all of that has changed the landscape a bit, but ultimately these things are not that different. So when you look at other churches that are struggling with incorporating young people and they're not going to start an internship leadership development program, what are some things they could be doing to not just attract, but to engage in a meaningful discipleship way, the younger generation and be more winsome there?
Well, I think the big one is to think through what are the hoops that somebody has to jump through.
To do what?
To have a meaningful participation in your church.
Okay, so like small groups ministry, if they were going to be a leader.
Yeah.
What hoops? Okay.
Yeah. In other words, are we making it difficult for the younger generation? I think what we often do, and this may not have to do just with age, but we do it with a lot of things, that we want to have people prove themselves before we actually give them something meaningful to do.
Yes.
And I think that particularly with this generation, they're not willing to jump through hoops.
That's very much more, I think, the boomer generation.
Yeah.
That was more of that kind of, you put your boots to the ground and then you prove yourself and then you get the promotion kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think looking for ways to make it easy for them to be involved. This is kind of a characteristic of Saddleback. We always
easy entry points. Yeah,
exactly. Low hurdle, and then bring them along, but get them in and give them that. And so that's what I would do. And it's like any generation, but this generation has a ton to offer. And so I think if you can take advantage of that, plug into it, find ways to lower the bar and get them involved, I think you'll see great results.
What do you think the obstacles are? Like, why aren't churches doing more of this kind of thing? And when you look, I was just having a conversation earlier today with someone in a church, and I said, what would you want to ask Dave on this topic? And he said, why haven't our church's style of worship and the nuts and bolts of how we do church changed? Mm-hmm. And he's in his probably late 20s.
Okay.
And so he's like, it seems like we talk about reaching younger generation, and we're going to hand it off to them or us in his case, but it hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. So why is change so slow, and why hasn't it changed, and what's going on with church? And I said, okay, Dave, I will ask him this question.
And I'll give you my opinion. I think it's fear. I think that, there's a sense that, and it's a good thing. We have a sense of stewardship, that we are, leading God's church. That's a big deal. And so shouldn't we be careful about how we hand off leadership? And I think, there's some truth to that. I don't think we should be completely foolish about it. But I think we're so afraid of that sometimes that we make it very difficult for younger generations to step up and get involved and be in leadership. And so I think the question comes down to is maybe flipping it a little bit and saying, as I said before, what hoops are we making people jump through? Mm-hmm. And are those hoops really necessary? Carolyn, that we for a long time have let anybody start a small group, for instance.
Yes, you're hoopless.
Now, that's not as bad as it sounds,
right?
Because you can start a small group with your own friends.
Right.
And I can put people in your group, but if you want to get a group of friends together and have a small group, no questions asked, we'll let you do it. And then we come along and we surround them and we bring them along. And I think that's a model. I think that's the Jesus model, frankly. I mean, he took a bunch of disciples who had no reason to be religious leaders, spiritual leaders, and he brought them along. They were willing to do it. And so I think we really need to ask ourselves those hard questions. Are we putting hoops in place that really don't need to be there?
Yeah, and I think you're right. The fear factor, maybe letting go of control, and maybe even the messiness.
Yeah, well, there is that too.
Yeah, right? Because if you can keep some hoops in place, the mess is more contained. Talk to us about that in terms of leadership. Yeah. And I know you do a lot of speaking and writing and such around leadership. So leading this generation, how would you advise them differently? What kind of leader do we need to be?
Well, I've used the term vision here several times, I think, in this conversation already. Yeah. I'll add to that the term values. I think we have to have values-oriented leadership. In fact, we were talking about this a bit last night.
Yes.
But I think the knee-jerk for leaders is to try and define as carefully as possible what we want people to do. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we end up, even when we get people involved and they're willing to get involved, oftentimes what we do is we give them tasks.
Yes.
People don't want tasks. People want responsibilities. They don't want to.
Do they really?
They really do.
They act like they don't, though.
We aren't very good always at giving responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And they want to know outcomes rather than the how-tos. Now, there's insecurities with people, so they want to know a certain amount of that. Mm-hmm. But if you lead with a vision, where is it that we are going? Mm-hmm. You give them some values that you want them to operate by, and you give them some responsibilities instead of tasks. If they want more, they'll ask you for it.
Mm.
But you don't have to lead with that. And what tends to happen, at least this is my experience, when you do it that way, you attract leaders then to be part of something like that.
That's true.
And so that's what I would say is vision is critical. Why are you doing what you're doing? And vision is kind of a misunderstood word. I won't go into a whole thing on it here. But vision should always be about solving some human problem. In other words, vision is more than a destination. Vision is the solution to a problem that people care about. And when you offer a solution to a problem that people care about, they want to be part of that.
That's true.
And so those are some of the keys, I think, not just to leading this generation. As I said, I think that's universal. But these generations we're talking about, it's really important to them.
Yeah, so let's apply those. For small groups, because this is our audience. So walk us through, Dave, okay, if you were going to recruit or invite a young person to become a small group leader, so walk us through the vision, values, and peace. What kind of conversations and questions would you be asking this person to figure out if they should be onboarding?
And what we would appeal to is a couple of things. One is the appeal to fellowship. In other words,
well, this is the loneliest generation ever. So yeah, that would be a good target for solving the human problem that, is so evident.
Yeah, exactly. So you're linking them together. But the way that we would do it is to say, get your friends together. Get people that you know. In other words, bring purpose to your friendships. And we would give them a vision for that. Typically, we are using curriculum, at least as an entry point.
Right.
Something that is going to appeal to them, a big life question. So get your friends together and have a conversation about that. That's about as much vision as we would give them.
Okay.
But we would say that's really what we'll give you the tools that you need to do that, and you get going on that.
I love how practical and simple that is. Because I know for some, the vision would be, Matthew 28, go and make disciples. And that's the vision. And it's hard to make that bite-sized and appealing to someone who's stepping into leadership for the first time. Yeah. So I love how pragmatic and doable that vision is. Okay, so continue to walk us through that model. So the values that you would put into place for that person?
Yeah, and so then we would give them, actually, we'd go very light on values. But we would say, because what we would give them is something to have a conversation around. But included in that, and I think it's really important in small groups, is that whatever you say in your group is going to stay in your group.
Right.
And so you're creating a safe place for you and your friends to have a conversation around this topic.
So it'd be something like the covenants that we use in a lot of small group churches. They use that, which has the confidentiality, which has, we're going to not gossip. We're going to, lift each other in prayer. I mean, there's a handful of those kinds of values.
Yep.
So you kind of pick those. Okay.
And then from there, we would really take them on the journey. And that's where we would surround them with other training resources, coaching, and that kind of thing. But the journey that we want to take them on is, hey, this is great. You found something meaningful in the group, assuming that that's what happened. Let us help you bring a little more purpose to your group then. And then we would introduce some discipleship basics, to think about how can they help each other grow in their faith and have conversations around that. And then ultimately the outcome that we would want to take them to is, how can we help you have a really healthy group? And for us, that's balancing the 5 purposes and bringing those things into place. So we take them through a journey. Ultimately, the journey is, it's not just a small group leader and a bunch of people, but it's a group of people who are committed to leading together to have a healthy small group. And so we would start. It's interesting you said you made the vision simple, and I did that purposely in the beginning. The vision is actually much larger. But you give them enough of the vision that is where they are right then, and then you actually explain more of the vision, give them more tools to reach it as they go on this journey.
Which is the Jesus model as well. He didn't give them everything. He just said, "Follow me," and then they hung out for 3 years before they got the outcome.
Exactly.
In it. So I think that just seems like a really great, even though there are some hoops per se, or there's the values matter. It's not like, you're throwing all that out the window, but to give clarity, I think that clarity is kind and it helps people know what they're stepping in for.
And you are giving them something presumably that's attractive to them. So you're just telling them, here's how you can have something that you're actually looking for. And so rather than it being, here's some things you have to do if you want to have a small group.
Right.
We'll help you have a small group, and here's how to do it.
And we're not saying, here's what you should want.
Yeah.
Which the top-down model seems to no longer be applicable.
Yeah. We can help them with that as they go through the journey. We can kind of give them, it's like laying a trail of breadcrumbs here a little bit, but we're bringing them along through the process.
It takes a lot of patience, Dave.
It does.
Is that another barrier for why we're not doing this great? Because that's a relational process that takes a lot more patience than handing over a program.
And Jesus lived with
we're back with Jesus. Yes.
Yeah. But I think it really is the model. Rick Warren likes to say, and I say it a lot because I think it's so smart. He says, you can structure for growth or you can structure for control. And I'm a whole lot more comfortable with control, but I've learned that growth, you mentioned messiness earlier, this kind of low hurdle process really pays off in the long run. And you're able to affect a lot more people that way.
Yeah, and this generation won't respond to the other model anyway.
Exactly.
So it's kind of game over anyway. Yeah. So we might as well adapt or die. This is how it rolls. So I think we would behoove us to figure out how to make it more invitational and to lower the hurdle. So last question, we're talking about outcomes. So in your work on the internship program, now that you've been doing it for a dozen years, what's been the outcome that's been exciting for you to see? I'm not going to ask you to break down what percent of people still love Jesus, still love Saddleback, but just in general, how has that been in the outcome? Has it been what you've looked for?
Yeah, it really has. And it has been fun to watch, especially over that period of time. Going back, our goal with the intern program is to develop Christian leaders who can lead in any environment. And so over a dozen years, we've got, I think we have well over 1,000 interns. Wow. We can't track all of them. We have 1,000 intern alumni, if you will. One of my favorite, this is a statistics, one of my favorite statistics is that I think it's about 70 of our staff at Saddleback are former interns.
Wow, that's amazing.
Including one of our elders is a former intern.
That's so cool.
And so it's benefited our church. We've seen it there, but we hear the stories from people who are having an impact, in other places, other churches, businesses, education, government, wherever. And so it's just fun to watch it.
Oh, that's really cool. All right. Well, any last thing you'd like to share before you go?
I think, number one, thanks for letting me be on here with you. But it's, I think this is an extremely challenging time for the church, no doubt. Yeah. But I also think it's a time of huge opportunity. And we've been talking about these younger generations. I think that they are key to us taking advantage of the opportunity that God is giving us right now.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Dave, for being with us, sharing your wisdom, and continuing to equip young people out into the world to be Christian leaders, because we need them. So thank you for your work.
Thanks for having me, Carolyn.
All right. Well, you can connect with Dave by his email. What is your email?
It's dalford, DALFORD, @saddleback.com.
Yes. Thank you for being available. If you have any questions to follow up with Dave, I know he's very gracious. And for the Small Group Network, I don't know if it's Steve Lade makes you do this or not, but it's been so great to have you as a resource for the network. And he speaks of you so highly. So I think he's just basically made this part of your bucket on equipping the church. This is Small Group Network is part of it. So feel free to reach out to Dave. And again, thank you all for listening to Here to There, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Group Talk. We invite you to subscribe to our podcast through iTunes and get new episodes downloaded automatically. Also, if you enjoy this program, please take a few minutes to give us a positive rating on iTunes so that other small group point people can find us more easily. We encourage you to visit our website at smallgroupnetwork.com to access our library of free resources, connect to a huddle with other small group ministry leaders in your area, read our blog articles, or join us on our Facebook group. Don't forget to use the hashtag SGNet when engaging with your social media channels. Thank you for your support.